was one of the best meetings, one of the liveliest, one of the most articulate groups of people. Tonight, that dialogue in the media continues, and we're back here again to see what's happened in the last 2 or 3 years, for better or for worse. And it could not be at a timelier moment, because right now the FCC is in the midst of a hugely important proceeding that will decide for years and years how our media is going to look, our radio, our television, newspapers, cable, even the internet. Will our media help us to expand democracy, or will it primarily serve the commercial interests of a few huge players? And this time we have to ensure that the proceeding is open and transparent instead of commissioners hiding in their offices in Washington. This time, let all the FCC commissioners come to Seattle.
Hello, my name is Jacqueline Moscu.
And I'm Sarah Cook.
And we're here to share some facts and some thoughts about the upcoming FCC hearing happening later this month. The clip that you just saw was a clip of FCC Commissioner Michael Copps speaking in Seattle last November. This time, all the commissioners will come to Seattle for the 6th and final hearing to gather public testimony concerning media consolidation.
Back in 2003, the FCC voted to deregulate media ownership. This would potentially allow large companies to buy more local broadcast stations and would have stifled the presence of independent and minority media ownership. However, the courts rejected that decision, and the FCC was forced to go back and look at the regulations again.
The FCC will soon announce a public meeting to be held in Seattle on a yet-to-be-announced date. At that meeting, the FCC will take public comment on 6 rules it is examining which deal with restrictions on ownership of various broadcast stations and newspapers. Current regulations limit the percentage and number of local and national stations a single entity can hold. A bipartisan array of critics of the 2003 decision say that the weakened regulations diminishes the diversity of media ownership, hurts local community coverage, and allows a small number of companies to control the majority of what is seen, heard, and read.
If a company purchases a large percentage of a unique market, it holds influence over the information that market receives. Local markets can suffer if national company does not understand local issues and does not hold itself accountable to the region. Local elections can be overlooked, local voices can be ignored, and often, local reporters and broadcasters can lose their jobs as a result of media consolidation. The FCC has taken public comment from major media corporations, citizens, and journalists across the United States. The FCC has held public meetings in major cities across the country, including Los Angeles, Tampa, Nashville, Harrisburg, and Chicago. Last year, Democratic Commissioners Michael Copps and Jonathan Adelstein held town hall-style meetings across the country, including one at the Central Library in Seattle. After this Seattle hearing, the FCC will decide how ownership rules should be changed. In this broadcast, we will tell you about the 6 rules the FCC is examining, discuss the impact of weakened FCC regulations, talk with local media activists, and explain how you, the viewer, can be involved and share your voice in this discussion.
Before we discuss the impact of the decisions the FCC will make, let's look at each of the 6 rules the FCC is studying. Some the FCC has proposed changing, but others the FCC is collecting information on whether or not these rules should be retained at all. We will give a brief summary of the first 4 rules and then discuss the proposed changes to the last 2.
The local radio ownership limit. This regulation, with caps set by Congress in 1996, limits the number of radio stations within an area on a 4-step scale that increases with the size of a local market. With this regulation, a single company can own between 5 and 8 stations, depending on how many stations serve a region.
UHF discount. In 2004, Congress enacted laws limiting the percentage of television stations any single entity can own. According to the ruling, one company can own any number of television stations as long as the total audience reached is no more than 39% of the national television audience.
Radio and television cross-ownership limit. Companies may own one station and a varying number of radio stations in a local market, depending on the number of independently owned media voices that are left.
Dual network ban. While a company can hold common ownership of multiple broadcast networks, the dual network ban prohibits the top 4 networks, ABC, CBS, Fox, and NBC, from merging.
The local television ownership limit. This rule restricts a single entity from owning 2 television stations within a local market, with a couple of exceptions. The FCC is proposing to relax this rule. It would allow a single company to own up to 2 stations in markets with 17 or fewer stations, and up to 3 in markets with 18 or more stations.
Newspaper broadcast cross-ownership ban. This regulation prohibits a company from owning a full-service broadcast station, television or radio, and daily newspaper. It's prohibited if the broadcast area completely encompasses the newspaper's city of publication. The FCC proposes relaxing this rule, and ownership limits will depend on the size of the market. Cross-ownership bans would only be upheld in markets with 3 or fewer stations. Markets with 9 or more stations will have no limits beyond the applicable television and radio caps. So what does this mean for our local media if these regulations are weakened? What's at stake is our ability to disseminate information, our pathways for community building, and in a real sense, democracy itself. Deregulation, in effect, will slowly strip away our First and Fourth Amendment rights to free speech and an independent press. According to media activist group Reclaim the Media, what's at stake includes local control of media, quality journalism, independent music and culture, minority and women's voices, in short, a real diversity of voices on our airwaves.
Let's look a little closer at the effect deregulation has already had on diversity and local accountability in media, and what's likely to be in store if we allow even more consolidation to take place.
First, let's look at localism, or local accountability. According to one of the FCC's own studies from 2004, locally owned media are better at serving their communities than media belonging to distant corporate owners. The study showed that locally owned media dedicate 20 to 25% more of their newscasts to local stories. The same study found that ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox networks aired significantly less. Further media consolidation will extend this trend, decreasing the amount of information community members receive about their own communities.
Locally owned, independent media matters. Whether you're watching television, surfing the internet, listening to the radio, or reading the newspaper, you spend about half of your waking moments, that's about 8 hours a day, engaged with some type of media. Local stations help keep listeners informed. Low-power WQRZ-LP stayed on the air throughout Hurricanes Rita and Katrina, helped keeping Mississippi Gulf Coast citizens informed. Without locally owned and operated stations, listeners can suffer from a lack of vital information. For example, in 2002, in Minot, North Dakota, a train carrying hazardous chemicals derailed. Citizens did not get information about this derailment because the Clear Channel owned and operated station was on autopilot.
Media consolidation is an issue that spans the political spectrum. Local media matters to everyone, as witnessed by this next clip.